I was shocked to see the long thing between the human man's legs. The first thing Lyra noticed about humans was that they never stopped moving. Even when they were standing still, their faces twitched, their fingers tapped, their eyes darted everywhere like tiny sensors on caffeine. The ship Endeavor was full of them, laughing, arguing, and somehow managing to spill liquid on every available surface. She had only been aboard for 3 hours, and already she'd recorded 17 behavioral anomalies, 2 arguments over something called snacks, and 1 human who'd accidentally locked himself inside a storage unit while trying to see how fast the door closed. Her own people, the Valari, were not like this. On Velar Prime, silence was the highest form of intelligence, and stillness was considered an art. The idea of drinking hot bean water and shouting about football scores while the engines hummed beneath your feet was, frankly, barbaric. And yet, she couldn't deny it. Barbaric had a certain charm. The human captain, James Wren, greeted her with that irrepressible confidence common among his species. He had the kind of grin that could power a small moon and the posture of someone who thought gravity itself obeyed him out of respect. "Dr. Lyra, welcome aboard. Hope you don't mind a little chaos," he said, motioning her through the corridor that vibrated faintly with the hum of the ship's quantum core. "Define a little," she replied, keeping her translator tuned for sarcasm, which humans apparently considered a legitimate language. He chuckled. "You'll fit right in." Lyra wasn't so sure. Every console she passed looked like it had been repaired with duct tape and optimism. The crew spoke in rapid bursts of slang she could barely interpret. One engineer referred to the warp engine as the spicy noodle, and another asked if Lyra's ears picked up radio signals. She took notes, mostly so she could later file them under cultural oddities that should not exist. Her quarters were small but serviceable, an oxygen recycler, a sleep pod, and a holographic window that displayed the nearest star system. She unpacked her tools with care: molecular scanner, tissue analyzer, sonic sterilizer. Then, on her desk, she placed her most important item, a slim silver notebook labeled Xenobiology, species 437 human. The final entry, written before her mission, read, "Subject exhibits unpredictable emotional, physical, and psychological patterns. Proceed with caution." By the end of her first day, she had already added a new line, also highly combustible near caffeine. Dinner in the mess hall was her first true immersion in human culture. The smell alone nearly shorted out her olfactory sensors. There were foods that bubbled, foods that hissed, and something called taco surprise that emitted an unsettling blue vapor. When she asked what the surprise was, James said, "If we told you, it wouldn't be a surprise." She noted that human humor often masked danger. Halfway through the meal, a crew member accidentally triggered the emergency fire foam. White clouds erupted across the tables. Humans screamed, laughed, and took selfies. Lyra stood still, covered in foam, wondering if this was some kind of initiation ritual. James appeared beside her, equally drenched, holding 2 cups of what he called space beer. "Welcome to humanity," he said, raising his cup. "I will need extensive therapy," she replied flatly, which made him laugh harder. Later that night, as she recorded her observations, she found herself smiling, an involuntary reaction she was not accustomed to. There was something infectious about human energy. They could turn disaster into comedy and boredom into chaos. Even their ship, patched together with mismatched alloys, seemed to hum with personality. The Endeavor wasn't elegant, but it was alive. When she visited the observation deck, she found James there again, gazing out at the swirling lights of the nebula. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. "It's chaotic," she answered. "Same thing," he replied, and for the first time, she wondered if perhaps he was right. He asked her about Velar Prime, about its floating crystal cities and symphonic weather patterns. She told him how her people communicated through harmonic resonance, where emotions translated into sound frequencies. "So you literally talk with feelings," he said. "Yes. We find words inefficient." "Well, you're going to love humans then. We use way too many." She laughed softly, but it startled even her. The sound echoed lightly through the deck, blending with the low hum of the stars. When she retired for the night, She reviewed her notes again. The scientific part of her wanted to analyze him, his speech patterns, his gestures, the way his voice lowered when he tried to be serious. But another part of her, a quieter part she didn't recognize, wanted simply to understand. Humans were not logical, but they were vivid. They burned bright and fast, like comets, leaving trails of emotion in their wake. Before closing her log, she wrote one more observation. Human captain demonstrates unusual gravitational pull, metaphorically, possibly biologically relevant. Further study required. The next morning, the ship alarmed with a red glow. Something was wrong with the engines, and James's voice thundered through the intercom. All hands brace for turbulence. Apparently, the spicy noodle doesn't like Mondays. Lyra grabbed the nearest handrail, rolling her eyes. And they said this would be a peaceful research mission, she muttered. The ship lurched violently. Somewhere behind her, an engineer yelled, "We're out of coffee." The horror in his voice was more intense than the imminent crash. Lyra sighed, muttering her last note, before everything went black. Correction. Humans prioritize caffeine over survival. Fascinating. When consciousness returned, Lyra's first thought was that gravity had developed a personal vendetta against her. Everything hurt, including organs she didn't even remember having. The Endeavor was silent now, except for the occasional hiss of a ruptured coolant pipe and the distant groan of metal settling into defeat. The crash had been, by human standards, rough. By Valari standards, it qualified as an extinction-level event. She pushed aside a broken panel, blinking at the strange violet sky above. 2 suns glowed faintly behind thick amber clouds, and the air shimmered with charged particles. Her translator whispered that the planet's atmosphere contained trace elements of xenon, argon, and something unpronounceable but definitely spicy. Excellent. From behind the wreckage, a voice groaned. 10 out of 10 landing. Would fly again. James Wren emerged from a pile of debris, covered in soot, one boot missing, and still managing to smirk like the laws of physics worked for him out of politeness. Lyra scanned him quickly. No major fractures, mild concussion, possible delusion of competence, she said. He gave a lazy salute. Doctor, remind me never to let you write my medical reports. Around them, the forest buzzed with iridescent insects and tall crystalline plants that pulsed with inner light. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something sweet, like melted sugar. James retrieved a toolkit from the wreck and surveyed the damage. Engines are toast, comms are fried, and I think the coffee machine's gone sentient. Lyra followed his gaze. Indeed, a small metallic unit near the galley hatch was twitching ominously, emitting steam in rhythmic bursts. If it becomes self-aware, we surrender, she said. They set up camp beside the wreck, erecting a survival dome from emergency nanofilm. The dome shimmered faintly, humming as it stabilized oxygen levels. James fiddled with the beacon, muttering human curses that her translator politely replaced with the phrase, deeply concerned expressions of frustration. Lyra examined the terrain. No large predators within 1 kilometer, though there are multiple life forms emitting electromagnetic pulses similar to brain activity, possibly intelligent. Good, James said. Maybe they can fix the ship. The sun, or one of them, was setting, painting the alien sky in ripples of copper light. Lyra tried to focus on data, but her mind kept circling back to the strange warmth in her chest whenever James spoke. It was likely radiation poisoning, though the symptoms didn't match any known pattern. He built a fire from synthetic fuel, its flames glowing an unnatural teal. You know, he said, stirring a pot of protein stew with a wrench. Crash landing with an alien scientist wasn't on my bingo card, but it's not the worst thing that's happened this year. What was the worst? Running out of toilet paper on Io. We don't talk about it. Lyra blinked. I am both curious and horrified. That's the correct human response. They ate in silence, punctuated only by James's occasional attempt to convince the stew it was edible. Lyra analyzed the sample discreetly. The molecular structure is unstable. It could dissolve metal. Good thing I'm mostly stubbornness, he said, taking another bite. As night fell, the sky filled with floating lights, tiny creatures drifting like bioluminescent jellyfish. They pulsed softly, emitting harmonic frequencies. Lyra tilted her head, listening. "They're communicating," she murmured. "They use vibration patterns to transmit information. It's beautiful." James watched her, chin propped on his hand. "You talk about science like it's poetry." "It is. The universe is a sequence of elegant equations. Even chaos has symmetry. Now you're just showing off." "I learned from the best," she said, surprising herself, with a faint smile. The warmth between them grew, fragile but undeniable. Yet neither mentioned it, perhaps because survival still came first, or perhaps because both were equally unsure of what it meant. By the third day, they'd established a rhythm. Lyra repaired the oxygen filters, while James scavenged for food and occasionally argued with rocks that looked at him funny. She cataloged over 50 species of flora and fauna, all of which seemed mildly radioactive or deeply judgmental. He discovered that shouting, "I'm not food," deterred most predators. One morning, while Lyra was calibrating the beacon, James approached shirtless, carrying a piece of alloy from the wreck. "Think we can use this to boost the signal?" he asked. She glanced up and immediately froze. Her brain supplied several conflicting reports at once. Human male, warm-blooded, high oxygen efficiency, inexplicably asymmetrical musculature. For scientific accuracy, she ran a quick visual scan. "Your epidermis appears damaged. You should wear protective gear." "Relax, document. It's just a scratch. It's 10 centimeters long." "Fine, a dramatic scratch." She sighed, sealing the wound with a dermal patch. Her fingers brushed his skin, unexpectedly hot, pulsing with steady rhythm. He smiled down at her, teasing. "Careful. You'll make me think you care." "I care for the survival of my research subject," she said, but her voice didn't sound as steady as she wanted. He grinned. "Sure you do." By evening, the beacon finally blinked green. A signal, faint but distinct, pulsed into the void. Rescue was possible. Relief flooded her circuits, followed by a strange pang she couldn't categorize. Leaving this chaotic world meant leaving the strange rhythm they'd built together. As they sat by the fire that night, James handed her a ration bar. "If we get out of here, promise me one thing," he said. "What is it?" "Don't put Captain Nearly cried when out of coffee in your final report." "No promises," she replied, biting into the bar. "Scientific integrity demands accuracy." He laughed, and the sound echoed into the alien night, blending with the song of the floating lights. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, committing the sound to memory. For the first time, data didn't seem enough. Something inside her wanted to remember the feeling too. Lyra woke to the soft hum of the dome, vibrating with energy from the tiny solar collectors embedded in the nanofilm. James was already awake, crouched beside a cracked thermopod, muttering about the difficulty of boiling water in alien gravity. She pinched the bridge of her nose and reached for her scanner, trying to determine if she was still dreaming or just trapped in a particularly vivid nightmare. "Morning, Doc," he said, not looking up. "The planet survived another night. That's a win, right?" She tapped her scanner on a stray crystal shard. "Statistically, yes. Mortality rates for humans on planets with triple suns are typically higher. You, however, are defying probabilities by being both alive and irritating." He laughed, a sound that bounced off the dome like a rogue particle. "High praise. Want breakfast?" She considered the offer. Nutritional intake was crucial for cognitive function, and it appeared the only food source available had been stabilized by James's emergency engineering skills, which meant it was mostly edible and mildly combustible. "Affirmative," she said. The day began with surveying the nearby forest. Lyra noted the creatures that flickered in and out of visibility, their bioluminescence pulsing in sync with the planet's magnetic fields. James trailed behind, carrying a modified toolkit, occasionally whispering, "I'm totally invisible," to trees that did not care. Lyra recorded his behavior as a new data point. Humans engage in self-amusing behaviors with no apparent external reward. It was both fascinating and irritating. During the walk, they stumbled across a clearing filled with crystalline spires that emitted low-frequency vibrations. Lyra knelt, scanning the ground and the formations. "These structures are semi-sentient," she concluded. They respond to sound and pressure, possibly a defense mechanism or a communication system. James, ever the practical one, poked one of the spires. Hello, crystal alien. You like jokes? The spire emitted a resonant tone that vibrated through his hand. He yelped, hopping back. Not a fan, he said, rubbing his palm. Lyra noted. Humans lack instinctive understanding of alien communication signals. Further study required. By mid-afternoon, the duo had mapped half the clearing and cataloged 3 new species of flora with unusual luminescent properties. James had managed to entangle himself in a vine that responded to sound, causing him to sing off-key while dangling midair. Lyra couldn't suppress a laugh. Her data logs now included the note. Human locomotion often produces unintended comedic outcomes. Returning to camp, they found the beacon partially functional but emitting intermittent pulses. James muttered about circuitry and rogue electrons having a tea party, while Lyra methodically traced the problem. It required improvisation, a combination of alien alloy, human duct tape, and sheer optimism. She handed him the alloy pieces. Follow my instructions precisely, she said. Sure, he said, twisting a piece in the wrong direction. No, wait, I got this. A spark flew. Lyra yelped, stepping back. James grinned sheepishly. Consider that a test of reflexes. You passed. By evening, the beacon stabilized. Faint signals were now being transmitted to orbiting satellites. Rescue was closer. James wiped soot from his face and gestured to the fire. Celebratory stew? Lyra hesitated, scanning the concoction for molecular instability. It was only slightly hazardous. Acceptable, she said, sitting down. The meal passed with laughter. James recounted a story of a zero-gravity football game on a transport shuttle, including at least 3 moments where physics laws had been entirely optional. Lyra documented it, mentally filing it under human irrationality. Charming, hazardous, and unpredictable. Afterward, as they cleaned up, a sudden tremor shook the dome. Lyra leapt instinctively toward the wall, her scanner whining about seismic activity. James, however, stood in the middle of the room with his arms out, facing the tremor like a man challenging gravity itself. It's just a minor tectonic shift, Lyra said, adjusting her earpiece. Minor? That sounded like the planet sneezed. Lyra raised an eyebrow. Humans often misinterpret geophysical phenomena as personal affronts. Noted. When the quake subsided, they ventured outside to assess the effects. Trees had bent dramatically, and some crystalline plants now glowed brighter, as if amused. James leaned against a bent spire, brushing dust off his jacket. Well, I'd say they liked the show. Lyra couldn't help but agree. Despite their differences, despite the chaos, there was a rhythm to their collaboration. Humans had an annoying tendency to ignore caution, but that unpredictability created opportunities for discovery. And somehow, working beside James, she found herself more engaged, more tuned. Night fell. The sky shimmered with drifting lights, creatures, and the faint hum of energy. Lyra watched as James fiddled with a makeshift telescope, muttering about constellations he refused to pronounce correctly. You're enjoying this, she said. I'm surviving it, he replied. Close enough. They fell into a comfortable silence, punctuated only by the hum of the dome and the occasional crackle of the fire. Lyra recorded her final note for the day. Human presence introduces a variable not previously considered, unpredictably humorous emotional resonance. Unknown long-term effects. When she finally entered her sleep pod, the soft glow of the alien forest outside the dome cast flickering patterns across her features. She thought about James, about the ridiculous, chaotic, and brilliant creature that he was. She considered adding an addendum to her report. Captain exhibits behaviors likely to increase both scientific interest and personal irritation simultaneously. Somewhere deep in her neural circuits, she sensed an anomaly, a small, unquantifiable excitement whenever he was near. It was not logical. It was not expected. And yet, she decided not to analyze it immediately. Some variables, she concluded, were better observed than dissected. The last thought before sleep claimed her was that perhaps humans were not entirely chaos. Perhaps they were a different kind of order. one she might just like studying indefinitely. The morning arrived with a metallic groan as the planet shifted under the weight of its own gravity. Lyra adjusted her scanner, noting minor fluctuations in atmospheric density. James appeared behind her, already juggling 2 ration bars and humming a tune she didn't recognize. "You're up early," he said, balancing the bars on his palms like they were precarious artifacts. "I monitor environmental variables at all hours." "The planet is unstable," she replied, scanning a glowing fern. James dropped one of the bars onto the ground. "Unstable is an understatement. This place sneezes in 3 different directions at once." Lyra frowned. "Your metaphor is inaccurate. The geological readings indicate minor tectonic activity only. Sneezing implies muscular exertion." "Semantics," he said, popping the other bar into his mouth. "I prefer the poetic version." She shook her head and followed him toward the wreckage. The Endeavour sat half buried in the alien soil, its panels bent but salvageable. James climbed onto the hull, waving a screwdriver like a flag. "Plan A, get this baby flying again. Plan B, hope the aliens in the trees can push us off the planet." Lyra sighed, logging the statement under human problem-solving strategies. Dangerously optimistic. They spent the morning scavenging materials. James delighted in using the most unlikely items for repairs, including a piece of crystalline plant that resonated when tapped. "Think of it as a tuning fork for the ship," he said, bouncing it against a metal panel. Sparks flew. Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Or a potential hazard. Your improvisation is inefficient, but culturally interesting." He winked. "Glad you appreciate it." By midday, they had constructed a makeshift energy conduit to reroute power to the beacon. Lyra's scanner registered an unusual spike in the local electromagnetic field. "These crystals are amplifying the signal," she said. "Their resonance aligns with quantum oscillations in the conduit. You may have accidentally created a quantum amplifier." James raised an eyebrow. "So my guesswork works." "Accidentally, yes. Statistically improbable, but effective." The afternoon brought exploration. They traversed a canyon lined with jagged rocks that hummed faintly when touched. James leapt from one ledge to another, muttering about natural trampolines, while Lyra recorded precise measurements of resonance patterns. "Careful," she warned. "The vibrations could trigger structural instability in the canyon walls." "I call it adventure," he said, landing gracefully on a ledge, dusting off his hands. Lyra frowned, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Humans had a peculiar way of making danger entertaining. Later, as they rested beside a crystalline stream, James watched the water shimmer. "You know, Doc, I think this planet has a sense of humor. Look at that. Fish that glow like disco balls. Perfectly timed waves. Cosmic prankster material." "I would classify them as adaptive luminescent species," Lyra replied, scanning the water. "Their bioluminescence correlates with predator activity. Humor is not a factor." He smirked. "And yet, here we are, laughing at it." As the sun, or one of the 3, dipped toward the horizon, Lyra focused on the beacon. The signal was now strong enough to reach orbiting satellites, but intermittent surges caused minor feedback loops in the power system. She gestured to James. "If we adjust the resonance using these crystals, we might stabilize the emission." He nodded eagerly. "Crystal tuning. Sounds like a band name. You lead, I follow, and hope we don't explode." The next hour was filled with careful adjustments. Sparks danced along the conduit, causing James to yelp and dance in place. "Okay, note to self. Never stand directly on the quantum amplifier." Lyra ignored his theatrics, her fingers flying over controls. A final adjustment, a careful nudge to the crystal alignment, and the beacon pulsed steadily. A green signal blinked, sending a call for rescue into orbit. James collapsed onto a nearby rock, wiping sweat from his brow. "We did it. Not that it wasn't fun almost dying every 10 minutes." Lyra noted, humans consider near-death experiences recreational. Curious behavior. As night fell, they sat by the fire, sharing rations. James tossed a small glowing stone into the flames, watching it crackle. "You ever think about how improbable this all is? Crash landed on a weird planet, relying on a human and a half-baked plan to survive. Lyra scanned the horizon, recording the ambient energy patterns. Statistically, yes. Improbable, but not impossible. The combination of human unpredictability and alien ingenuity increases survival probability by an undetermined factor. James laughed. See, that's why I like you, document. You quantify insanity and still call it progress. The stars above twinkled as floating lights drifted among the alien trees. Lyra felt a subtle shift in her own calculations, a variable she hadn't accounted for: human companionship. You're quiet, James said, breaking the silence. Thinking about something scary? Thinking about survival probabilities, she replied, though the corners of her mouth betrayed a smile. He grinned. Survival's more fun when it comes with company, even one that insists on meticulous note-taking. They shared a rare moment of ease. The dangers were still present: aliens, tectonics, and rogue technology. But for now, laughter and clever improvisation were enough. Lyra updated her log. Human interactions may increase cognitive flexibility and morale under duress, potentially beneficial to long-term survival. As she entered her pod that night, she allowed herself a thought she hadn't yet written down. Perhaps humans were more than chaotic. Perhaps, in their reckless, unpredictable way, they were capable of teaching her something no scanner ever could. And somewhere deep in the circuits of her mind, a quiet, unexpected warmth settled in, a variable she was eager, if cautious, to explore. The day began with a low hum through the wreckage of the Endeavor, a subtle vibration that suggested the planet itself was impatient. Lyra checked the beacon for the umpteenth time, her scanners confirming that the signal was now stable, strong enough to reach orbiting satellites with ease. James lounged nearby, eating something that emitted a suspicious glow. "You've been watching that beacon for 3 hours," he said. "You need to eat, or you'll start scanning your own hair." "I am monitoring system integrity," she replied. "Biological sustenance is secondary." He grinned. "Secondary? Sure. I'll note that in the Human Survival Guide, prioritize sarcasm over meals." They began the final repairs to the ship's hull. Lyra directed James with precise instructions, occasionally dodging sparks from the makeshift quantum conduit. He followed half of them and improvised the other half, somehow creating a harmonic resonance that made the ship vibrate pleasantly. "I call it musical engineering," he said. "You call it reckless improvisation," Lyra corrected, though she couldn't hide a small smile. By mid-morning, the ship was structurally sound. Lyra ran simulations, confirming that the engines would function at minimal capacity for the journey home. James tapped the console with a screwdriver, adding, "Minimal capacity is exactly how I like my engines. Keeps things exciting." The planet, seemingly aware of their impending departure, stirred. A faint wind shifted, carrying the scent of ozone and metallic flora. Lyra noted the subtle changes in electromagnetic fields around the crystalline trees. "They are responding," she said. "Responding how?" James asked, craning his neck. "They are resonating with our energy signatures. Likely aware of our presence. Possibly grateful," she said. James laughed. "Or plotting revenge for poking their friends with a wrench yesterday." Lyra considered this. Humans interpret alien response incorrectly. Likely, but amusing hypothesis. As the afternoon sun, or one of them, slipped across the sky, Lyra noticed a shift in herself. She no longer recorded James as a mere subject of study. The warmth in her chest, once a variable she tried to suppress, had grown steady. The logic circuits of her mind tried to rationalize it. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but their effects could be measured in subtle emotional fluctuations, in changes to neurochemical balance. Or, perhaps, some things were beyond calculation. James appeared beside her, holding a piece of crystal from the forest. "Look at this. It resonates when I hum. We could turn it into a warning system, or a music box. Your choice." Lyra hesitated. "I believe its function is best preserved as a natural amplifier. Music may disrupt quantum stability." He smirked. "Or it may make everything a lot more fun. Fun is good for morale." She laughed softly. Human logic remains inconsistent but strangely persuasive. When the signal finally reached orbiting satellites, rescue ships descended. They hovered silently, sleek and silver against the alien horizon. Lyra and James prepared the Endeavour for launch. She checked every panel, recalibrated every scanner, and confirmed every system. James leaned against the hull, arms crossed, watching her work. "You've become different since we landed here," he said. "I have adapted to variables unforeseen in the initial study," she replied. He chuckled. "Translation: this planet, me. Humans, we've gotten under your metal shell." Lyra paused. "Under my metal shell." Perhaps that was accurate. Perhaps humans could do something even Valari science could not predict. As they climbed aboard the ship, James gestured toward the alien landscape. "I'll miss this place. And all the things that almost killed us." Lyra's scanner recorded subtle fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, reading as if the planet itself hummed farewell. She stored the data, yet her mind wandered to the unquantifiable, the laughter, the shared frustration, the small, unplanned moments that made survival feel alive. The engines roared to life. Lyra monitored output, while James adjusted the thrusters with a flourish. The Endeavour lifted, gliding above the crystalline forest, leaving faint pulses of resonance behind. During the journey back, Lyra recorded her final observations of the planet. Flora and fauna stable, minimal seismic activity anticipated, human interaction present, and quantifiably beneficial to both biological and psychological metrics. She paused, pen hovering over the last line. Humans cannot be fully understood, yet their presence enhances both survival probability and emotional variance. Further study required, preferably indefinitely. James glanced over, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Writing a love letter to humanity." "I am documenting anomalies," she said, though her voice carried a faint note of amusement. He laughed. "Anomalies, huh? You've changed too, you know." She considered this. She had once believed that studying humans required distance, objectivity, and calculation. Now, she realized she had learned unpredictability, humor, and emotional nuance. She had grown capable of valuing things beyond logic, appreciating chaos, and finding patterns in laughter. The rescue fleet met them near orbit. Humans swarmed the Endeavour, securing the vessel and preparing for transit. Lyra stood beside James, scanning incoming data streams, but her mind was partly elsewhere, on shared jokes, misadventures, and the unquantifiable warmth she felt in his presence. As the ship lifted toward the fleet, James turned to her. "So, Doc, ready for the next adventure?" Lyra smiled, an expression no scanner could quantify. "Yes, and perhaps next time, I will not object so much to human improvisation." He grinned. "Glad to hear it. It makes the universe a lot more interesting." The Endeavour joined the fleet, engines pulsing in perfect resonance. Lyra recorded one final note. "Life is unpredictable. Survival requires logic, adaptability, and occasional humor. Emotional variables, once dismissed, are perhaps the most vital to both study and experience." And as the stars stretched into hyperspace, Lyra realized she was no longer merely an observer. She was part of the pattern, part of the chaos, part of the laughter, and she would never be the same. The universe waited, vast and uncharted, but she no longer feared its surprises. With humans, unpredictability had become a kind of home. The end.